I first heard about the abandoned hospital from a local bartender in Black Ridge, Colorado. It was a quiet, forgettable town, the kind that people only pass through on their way to somewhere else. But when I mentioned I was a journalist looking for strange local stories, the bartender leaned in, lowering his voice. "If you want something real disturbing, check out St. Mary's Military Hospital. But don't stay too long." I had never heard of the place. A quick internet search showed nothing. No articles, no history, not even a mention in Urban Explorer forums. It was like the hospital had been erased from existence. That only made me more curious. The next morning, I followed the bartender's vague directions and found myself in front of a massive, crumbling structure on the outskirts of town. Thick iron gates, twisted with rust, loomed in front of me, secured by an old chain and a padlock. Beyond the fence, the hospital itself stood like a corpse of concrete and glass, its windows blackened and broken. Vines curled around the walls, and the air smelled of decay and damp stone. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as I stepped closer. The building looked dead, but deep down, something about it felt alive. With a quick motion, I pulled out a pair of bolt cutters from my backpack and snapped the lock. The chain rattled as it fell to the ground. I hesitated, listening. Silence. No alarms, no signs that anyone had been here in years. I pushed open the heavy gate and stepped inside. The hospital lobby was vast, with a reception desk coated in layers of dust. Above it, a faded sign read, "St. Mary's Military Hospital, ST 1943. The floor was littered with shattered glass, old medical forms, and what looked like dried leaves carried in by the wind. I clicked on my flashlight and moved forward cautiously. My footsteps echoing in the empty hall. Peeling posters lined the walls, showing outdated health warnings for diseases long eradicated. There were wheelchairs, overturned gurneys, and a rotting stretcher still covered in a filthy, blood-stained sheet. But what disturbed me the most was the overwhelming feeling that I was being watched. Every now and then, I swore I heard something. A faint rustling, the softest sound of movement behind me. I whipped my flashlight toward the noise, but there was nothing, just the empty hallway stretching into darkness. Get it together, Emily. I took a deep breath and pressed on, pushing through a pair of rusted double doors into what used to be the patient wards. Rows of hospital beds, most of them overturned, filled the room. The walls were covered in deep scratch marks, as if someone or something had desperately tried to claw their way out. Then I saw it, a single bed in the center of the room, still upright. And lying on it was a patient file, untouched by dust, as if someone had placed it there recently. My heart pounded as I picked it up. The name on the file was Anthony Caldwell, admitted 1971. There was no discharge date. A loud thud echoed from somewhere down the hall. I wasn't alone. I froze. The thud had come from somewhere down the hall. It wasn't the sound of a collapsing structure or a falling piece of debris. It was deliberate, purposeful, like a footstep. My grip on the patient file tightened as I listened. The silence that followed was unnatural, pressing against my ears like the heavy weight of deep water. Then, another sound. A slow, dragging noise. Someone, or something, was in here with me. I clicked off my flashlight and crouched behind an overturned hospital bed, pressing my back against the cold metal. My breathing was shallow, barely controlled. I waited, counting the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3, silence. I dared to peek over the edge of the bed. The corridor outside the ward stretched into darkness, its shadows shifting as my eyes adjusted. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe it was just the wind moving debris or an animal that had wandered in. Get the pictures and get out, Emily. I swallowed my fear and lifted my phone, snapping photos of the patient. File before tucking it into my jacket. If this place really housed missing people, I needed proof. I needed more than just an abandoned hospital. I needed names, records, something that couldn't be dismissed as just another urban legend. Turned to leave, stepping carefully over the scattered debris. That's when I noticed something I had missed before. A door, slightly ajar at the end of the hall. It was different from the others. Heavier, reinforced with iron bolts, almost like it was meant to keep something inside. The words, "Authorized. Personnel only," were faintly visible beneath years of grime, and beside the door there were deep scratch marks in the wall, long, jagged, too large to belong to an animal. I hesitated, my body screaming at me to turn around and leave. But then I remembered the file in my pocket. Anthony Caldwell, admitted in 1971. If he had never been discharged, where had he gone? My fingers trembled as I pushed the door open. A cold, damp air rushed past me as I stepped inside. The stairwell beyond was narrow and steep, leading downward into the basement. My phone flashlight barely pierced the darkness, revealing cracked cement walls covered in something black and wet. I took a cautious step down, then another. The deeper I went, the stronger the stench of rot became, an overwhelming mix of mildew, old blood, and something else I couldn't place. I reached the bottom of the stairs and found myself in a long underground corridor lined with old metal doors. Each one had a small, fogged-up window near the top. Cells. These weren't storage rooms or utility closets. They were holding cells. My heart pounded as I stepped closer to the first door, wiping the dust from the glass with my sleeve. My breath caught in my throat. There was a bed inside, and on it, covered in decayed sheets, was the unmistakable shape of a human body. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. The body was too intact for someone who had been dead for decades. Its skin was dry, cracked, stretched over the bones like old parchment. Tubes still protruded from its arms, connecting to rusted medical equipment beside the bed. I turned to the next cell, and the next. They were all occupied. Some of the bodies had wires drilled into their skulls. Others had feeding tubes keeping them artificially sustained, their mouths hanging open in silent, unending screams. These weren't just bodies. These were patients, and some of them were still breathing. A low, wheezing noise filled the corridor. My blood ran cold. Then behind me, one of the doors creaked open, and something inside moved. The door behind me creaked open, the sound slicing through the suffocating silence like a razor. I couldn't move. My body was frozen in place, my mind struggling to process what I had just seen. Those weren't corpses in the cells. At least, not all of them. Some of them were still alive. A wet, rasping breath echoed from the darkness behind me. Something had moved inside the open cell. I turned slowly, my pulse hammering so hard in my chest that I felt lightheaded. My phone flashlight trembled in my grip as I aimed it toward the doorway. At first, I saw nothing. Just an old hospital bed, rusted equipment, the same sickly yellow sheets covering a frail, motionless body. Then it twitched. A bony hand emerged from beneath the sheets, fingers curling weakly, skin stretched so thin over the knuckles that it looked almost translucent. The entire arm was covered in IV punctures, scabbed over wounds where needles had been inserted and removed again and again. And then the head moved. I gasped, stumbling backward as the thing in the bed turned its face toward me. Its eyes were open, sunken and glassy, the color of fogged-up glass, as if it hadn't seen light in decades. Its lips were cracked and barely moved. As it exhaled, releasing a horrible wheezing noise, a sound that barely resembled human breathing. Then, in a voice so hoarse and dry that it barely made a sound, it whispered, "Help me." I nearly dropped my phone. My throat was too tight to respond, my feet too heavy to run. The thing in the bed shouldn't be alive. Its cheekbones protruded sharply through its sagging skin, its body reduced to a skeletal husk, as if it had been kept alive long past the point of death. And then, from down the corridor, another wheeze. I turned my head, my heart slamming against my ribs. In the cell next to it, Something else moved, and then another, and another. The patients were waking up. The air inside the underground ward grew thick with the sound of strained, unnatural breathing. A metallic clatter echoed down the hallway. One of the patients had tried to move, pulling against the rusted restraints on its wrists. I needed to get out. I took a step back, but the floor was slick, and my boot slipped against something wet. I barely caught myself before falling, shining my flashlight downward. I immediately regretted it. The floor was covered in dark stains, thick tar-like patches of dried blood and something that looked almost like black bile. And then I noticed the drag marks. Some of the beds had been moved recently. The scratches on the floor led toward the far end of the corridor, where a heavy metal door stood slightly ajar. The moment my light hit it, something inside the room slammed against it from the other side. I barely held in a scream. It wasn't just the patients in the beds. Something else was here. The wheezing behind me grew louder. I spun back toward the open cell, just in time to see the frail thing in the bed trying to reach for me. Its fingers twitched, its dry lips moving, but the sound that came out wasn't a plea anymore. It was a warning. Its hollow eyes stared into mine as it forced out one last breathless whisper, "They're coming!" A loud clang shattered the air as the metal door at the end of the hall burst open, and something inside stepped out. The metal door groaned as it swung open, the rusted hinges shrieking into the dead air. My whole body locked up, every nerve screaming at me to run, but I couldn't. Something stepped out of the shadows beyond the doorway. My flashlight flickered as I aimed it forward, illuminating a figure standing in the darkness. For a split second, I thought it was another patient, a frail, skeletal figure in a hospital gown, its skin stretched too tight over its bones. But then I saw its face. It was wearing a mask, a grotesque leather-like mask, stitched together from what looked like human skin. Its eye holes were uneven, and something glistened behind them, something wet, something alive. I sucked in a breath. The thing tilted its head as if studying me. Then it lurched forward. A low, gurgling sound bubbled up from its throat as it took its first staggering step into the hallway, dragging something heavy and wet behind it. I didn't want to see what it was holding. I turned and ran. The corridor was longer than I remembered. My footsteps echoed off the damp walls as I sprinted past rows of waking patients, their rattling breaths blending into one horrifying chorus. Some of them reached out as I passed, their hands trembling in the air, their mouths opening and closing as if trying to form words. But I couldn't stop. I needed to get out. My lungs burned as I reached the staircase at the end of the hallway. I took the steps 2 at a time, my boots slipping against the damp concrete. Behind me, I heard the sickening scrape of something heavy, dragging along the floor. It was following me. I burst through the door at the top of the stairs, slamming it shut behind me. The hallway above was no better, dark, empty, the air thick with the scent of old antiseptic and something rotting. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands, the screen too dim, too useless in the suffocating darkness. My signal was still dead, but then, as my eyes adjusted, I realized I wasn't alone. At the far end of the hallway, just before the main exit, 2 figures stood completely still. One was a man, dressed in a faded military uniform, his posture stiff, his face shrouded in shadow. The other was a doctor, or at least that's what his clothing suggested. An old-fashioned lab coat buttoned up to the collar, its fabric stained dark around the sleeves. Neither of them moved, neither of them spoke. But somehow, I knew. They had been waiting for me. I had seen too much. I wasn't supposed to leave. Behind me, the door to the basement rattled violently. That thing, whatever it was coming up the stairs. I had nowhere to go. The man in uniform took a slow step forward. The dim emergency lights flickered, finally casting just enough glow to reveal his face. My blood turned to ice. I had seen him before. not in person, but in old photographs, in articles about the hospital's mysterious closure. He was one of the commanders in charge of the facility when it was still operational, and he hadn't aged a day. He opened his mouth, and in a voice that sounded far too clear, too alive, he said, "You shouldn't have come here." I pressed my back against the door, my breath ragged, my mind racing for a way out. But before I could react, the doctor moved. His footsteps were silent as he crossed the hallway toward me. The overhead lights buzzed, flickered, and then cut out. Completely, the darkness swallowed me whole, and in that pitch-black void, I heard the doctor's voice, whispering right against my ear. "You're one of us now." Darkness. Not just the absence of light, but something thicker, heavier, like a presence pressing against my skin, filling my lungs. The doctor's voice still echoed in my ear. "You're one of us now." My body refused to move. I wanted to run, to scream, but it was as if the darkness itself had wrapped around me, pinning me in place. Then cold fingers brushed against my arm. I jerked back, heart pounding as a faint, flickering light pulsed through the corridor. The emergency bulbs stuttered, casting just enough glow for me to see that the doctor was gone, but I wasn't alone. The patients were awake now, dozens of them, still in their tattered hospital gowns, staring at me from the shadows. Their eyes were hollow, their skin pale and stretched thin, their limbs trembling like puppets waiting for their strings to be pulled. And behind them, standing completely still at the far end of the corridor, the man in uniform. He didn't blink, didn't breathe, but when he finally spoke, his voice was calm, emotionless. "You have a choice." I forced myself to swallow. My whole body screamed for me to run, but my feet refused to move. "What do you want?" I whispered, his eyes locked. Onto mine. "Stay or disappear. Stay or disappear." The words sent a sickening chill through my spine. I realized then what had happened to the people in this hospital. They hadn't died. They had been erased, taken from their lives, sealed away underground, turned into something less than human. My breathing quickened. I shook my head. "No, no, I'm leaving." The man's expression didn't change. "No one leaves." Behind me, the door to the basement burst open. I barely had time to react before something lunged from the shadows. A hand clamped around my wrist, thin, freezing, the skin stretched too tight over bone. I screamed, yanking myself free, stumbling backward. The figure from the basement wasn't wearing a mask anymore, because it had never been a mask. Its face was stitched together, patches of flesh crudely sewn into something that resembled a human, but wasn't. Its mouth gaped open, and from within its throat came a sound that wasn't a voice, a horrible, rattling echo of suffering. I ran. The hallway twisted around me as I sprinted toward the exit. The walls felt closer, the air thicker, like the hospital itself was trying to hold me in. The patients reached for me, their bony fingers brushing against my skin. Some of them murmured things, voices cracking, lost in a haze of forgotten memories. They were begging me to take them with me. But I couldn't. I couldn't even save myself. The main doors were in sight now, just a few steps away. I threw my weight against them, expecting resistance, expecting them to be locked. But they swung open, and I stumbled into the night. I hit the cold ground outside, gasping for breath. The air smelled different, crisp, real, alive. For a moment, I just lay there, staring up at the sky. The hospital loomed behind me, silent, its windows dark. I wasn't sure if I had made it out, or if the nightmare had just changed shape. Then a sound, a car. Headlights cut through the darkness. I scrambled to my feet, waving frantically. The vehicle slowed, gravel crunching beneath its tires, and for the first time in what felt like hours, hope flickered in my chest. The driver stepped out, a sheriff's deputy. His face was lined with exhaustion, his uniform slightly wrinkled. But he looked real, human. I ran toward him. "Please, you have to help me." The hospital, I stopped because his expression didn't change. He just stared at me, his face unreadable. Then, after a long moment, he let out a slow breath and muttered, "Damn it, not another one." A chill washed over me. Not another one? I turned, my eyes trailing back toward the hospital, and I saw it, my own reflection, staring at me from the glass doors. But something was wrong. The me in the reflection was still inside, and it was smiling.